Every application has some settings. It is important to get the application settings in the code in an elegant way. Option pattern is there to help. Hello and welcome to Code with Sar. I'm Sar. How are you doing? This is the fourth video in the series of Build a Library with me. We've covered extension method and the delegate. Today we're going to talk about a very popular pattern, options pattern in ASP.NET Core. This pattern is about getting the application settings and then use them in your application. It provides a consistent way to deal with application settings. Since there's a lot of topics to cover, and I do want to explain them in a clear, detailed way, I'm probably going to break this topic down to several parts. And for this one, we're going to talk about the basics. Things like how was life before options, what is binding in options pattern, and how to make it work with the dependency injection in ASP.NET Core. Without further ado, let's get started. The options pattern binds a section of configuration into a class. Before we take a look at how the options working, let's take a look at the code before options pattern. And then we'll compare the code and see how options makes our life better. Well, at least make the code better. Here's an example of application settings in the traditional .NET framework where we don't have options classes. We have three settings here: an application name, a cache lifetime, and a TMI. Imagine that I'm going to create a metadata endpoint. It will expose the application name and the cache lifetime. I'll need to get the settings through Configuration Manager like this. There are several places that could be improved. Firstly, the app settings is a name value collection, and unfortunately, the value that is returned is always a string. It is okay if the value that we want to get happen to be a string, like the application name on line 11. However, if the value is a different type, we'll have to parse the string by code. Like it on line 15, a string is parsed to timespan. It is not difficult to do. If we don't consider all those error handling, it is just not convenient. The second issue is there's no hierarchy or scope. It's like a global configuration store, and from the consumer class perspective, it is too much information. The more information a class has, the less secure and the more chance for a class to make a mistake. Now let's look at how options pattern overcomes these issues. The first thing we notice in this appsettings.json compared to web.config is the hierarchy. There are two sections in these settings, login and application. What this gives us is that we can deal with one section at a time. So classes that use application settings do not need to know the settings of login, vice versa. Each section can then be bound to a class. Let's take a look at how to do that. Firstly, we create a class. As a convention, the class name usually ends with options, but it is not required. Then there will be properties that maps to the settings one by one. For example, name to name and cache lifetime to cache lifetime. Pay attention to the type of the cache lifetime in the class. It is the time span already. I usually throw a default section name there as a constant string, but it is not required. Now let's take a look how do we get the value from the settings to the class object. Step 1. Create a default application options object. As you can see, the name is null, the cache lifetime is 0. The second step is to get the configuration section. And then you call bind method on the configuration section and pass in the options as a parameter. After that, values will be set to the properties of the object if they have a proper mapping. In this case, the name of the application and the cache lifetime has been set. Let's review this piece of code. There are two pieces of key information. One is actually the class of the options. Another is the configuration section. The application options provides strong type information about the settings, and the configuration section provides the portion of the configuration that matters. So strong type visits a string only as value and not too much information. Those are the improvements. But 4 lines of code is tedious. There is actually ways for us to write it in one-liner. Like it here, we call the get section on the configuration object so that we get the portion of the configuration node. Then we call this generic get method. This one's responsible for both creating an application options object, and then it will do the binding and return it. If we run it, you'll see we get the same result. Now that we understand the binding, let's take a look at how is it used in ASP.NET Core. ASP.NET Core heavily rely on dependency injection, so if you do not know what a dependency injection is, take a look at my other video that I'm going to put the link on the right upper corner. You need to at least understand what is a registering and what is an injection to understand what I'm going to talk about next. So, coming back to use options pattern in ASP.NET Core, the first step is to register it in a DI container. One way to do that is to call this addOptions method. It will take in the type for the options as a type parameter. And then you call this bind method and pass it to the iConfiguration section. So under the hood, the piece of information is the same. It is still the type for the option and then the section that provides the value to be bound. What does it do? It registers a delegate. Whenever an option of application options is injected, the delegate will be invoked and an application option with the proper value will be returned. For example, in this metadata controller, we are injecting an iOptions of application options. Notice that we don't inject application options by itself. We always inject iOptions of t. And the application options object is on the value of the option that is injected. I know it is a little bit confused at the very beginning, but once you get used to it, it's not difficult. Now, on the HTTP get method of get operation, we're returning an anonymous object which has a property named application name, cache lifetime, and a greeting. Let's see the result when it runs. Thanks for watching. Today we talked about the basics of options pattern. We see examples how to bind the values from app settings into strongly typed option classes. In the next video, I'm going to be talking more about practical scenarios and some advanced topics, like binding to an array or dictionary, and we'll take a look at how is it used in the JWT Authentication library. Please give me a thumb up if you like this one. Again, your encouragement is my best motivation to keep up. Subscribe if you want to know when the next one is ready. Keep coding, keep improving. And I will see you in the next one. Take care.